Good morning. It's Friday, March 14th. Happy Pi Day, 314. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 525 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. All right, here's the latest out of Doha. We're looking at a possible 42 to 50-day extension of the ceasefire in exchange for the release of 5 hostages, or perhaps even as many as 15. So you want my opinion? Here's what I'll say. I certainly like the idea of no violence for another 6 weeks, give or take, and I welcome the news this morning that Hamas is set to release American-Israeli Idan Alexander along with the bodies of 4 slain dual nationals. But I don't understand how Hamas has any leverage here. All the hostages simply must be released. That is non-negotiable. At some point, everyone's patience is going to run out. And I guess that might be when the war returns. All right, our guest today was supposed to be Eric Stakelbeck, the American author and television host known for The Watchmen on TBN. He's unable to join us today. Last minute change up, which is why we started just a few minutes late today. But we are incredibly fortunate to have my colleague Hussain Abdul-Hussain. He's a research fellow here at FDD. He's a specialist on Lebanon. He's got a huge amount to say on what's been going on in terms of these normalization talks between Israel and Lebanon, the border talks between Israel and Lebanon. So we're going to catch up with him in just a few shakes of a camel's tail. All right. Earlier this week, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei rejected a proposal by U.S. President Donald Trump to negotiate a nuclear deal. A letter reportedly written by Trump was delivered to Iran by the UAE. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi followed up with a softer position. He didn't rule out talks, but said that they need to occur on equal terms. That's a quote. First, let's acknowledge that Iran is not a democracy, and the man who sits atop this autocratic, theocratic, terror-supporting regime has rejected negotiations. But okay, you want to explore this call for equal terms? Fine. Let me ask, in what way is this regime equal to the United States? Not in terms of hard power. America has the edge there. Not in economic power. We've got the edge there too. Moral clarity, governance, no way. This regime is rotten. It's a blight on the Middle East. Since its inception in 1979, it has brought the region nothing but nightmares. We owe this regime no respect. I know there are some in Washington who are urging Trump to engage with Araghchi and to keep trying for diplomacy. Me, I think more pressure is needed, and it's needed now. The regime is already weak. More pressure can bring Khamenei to his knees. That's when serious nuclear disarmaments can begin, maybe disbanding terror proxies too. This is the art of the deal, folks. Come to the table from a position of strength. That's how this is won, and winning is paramount because nothing less than the stability of the Middle East is at stake. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, the IDF carried out a strike in Damascus yesterday. The strike targeted an empty residential building that served as a command and control center for Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The IDF posted a 9-second video of the strike, which then yielded plumes of black smoke from the building. The IDF apparently targeted an apartment that belonged to PIDG leader Ziad Nakhleh. At least that's what fellow PIDG members told the Associated Press. From what I hear, there are more PIDG fighters in Syria now than there ever have been in recent years. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz confirmed the strike, and he warned Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara to expect more where that came from, except Katz didn't use the name al-Shara. He used the Syrian leader's kunya, the al-Qaeda nom de guerre Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. That should give you a sense of how Jerusalem views the jihadi government in Damascus. No matter what it says on television or to foreign diplomats, I tend to take the same view. Headline 2, Qatar is preparing to supply natural gas to Syria. The gas will be transferred via pipeline through Jordan. Syria's electricity minister said that the project, which is a joint effort between the Qatar Fund for Development and the Jordanian Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, will boost the electricity supply in Syria by 2 to 4 hours per day. A U.S. official told Reuters that the Trump administration approved the arrangement. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The Qataris are major patrons of the new al-Qaeda regime in Syria. And they're not shy about it. This gas deal is just one more way that Qatar supports Islamist movements across the entire Middle East. I get that. That's the Qatari DNA. But Jordan, Trump, Someone explain to me what they get out of this, because at this point, it just looks like they're helping the wrong people. And headline 3, the United Nations published a report accusing Israel of perpetrating, quote, genocidal acts in Gaza. Get a load of this. The report claims that Israeli forces systematically committed gender-based violence against Palestinians. The UN Human Rights Council commission responsible for the report said that Israeli actions in Gaza amount to the crime of a crime against humanity of extermination. Never mind that Hamas terrorists raped and murdered their way through southern Israel on October 7, 2023. Israel's mission to the UN dismissed the report, which it noted was based on secondhand and uncorroborated sources. Israel's foreign ministry described the report as one of the worst blood libels in modern history. As for the Human Rights Council, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the Human Rights Council is anti-Semitic, terror-supporting, rotten, and irrelevant, among a few other adjectives. Sadly, I got to say, I think that's all true, and it really does echo what we've been saying at FDD for some time now. The UN is in dire need of an overhaul. It's simply no longer servicing the US-led system, not by a long shot. Okay. It's now time for our interview with Hussain Abdul-Hussain. He is a research fellow at FDD, one of the keener observers of what's been going on in Lebanon. He's got some interesting things to say. Not all of us are going to agree on some of the things that he is positing right now, but he is saying that this is a time for engagement, for possible normalization in Lebanon, with Hezbollah being as weak as it is. He's been making waves on social media. He's been writing about it in the print media. So I thought it was time to bring him onto the show. So let's do that right now. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Hussain Abdul-Hussain.
Good morning, John.
Good morning. All right, so let's set a level here. Let's start with just what is going on in Lebanon since Israel enacted Operation Castration, Operation from the liver to the knee, the beeper operation, whatever we want to call it. They eviscerated some of these top leaders. They sent Hezbollah into a tailspin. They took out something like 2/3 of Hezbollah's arsenal of missiles and rockets. The group is at a weaker state than we have seen it probably since the 1980s. So now what is happening?
Well, John, like you're saying, Hezbollah is crushed, but it's not dead yet. And it's trying to come back. They're not sure how, but they are trying to just leave assets in place so that when the time comes, they can come back. Now, they're focused on rebuilding their neighborhoods, the neighborhoods of their partisans and their supporters. They're focused on rebuilding their arsenal and their rank and file. They've been decimated. They need to do all these things, but they can't do them all at once. So what they're doing now is that they've told the state, okay, listen, you take care of rebuilding things, and we will just lay low, just stay away from fully disarming us. I don't think the state is playing along, but the state is also not taking on Hezbollah the way that we'd expect them to do, just say, surrender your arms. Thankfully, yesterday there was a cabinet meeting. Many of the ministers in the cabinet demanded that an item on the agenda for the next week meeting would be Hezbollah surrendering its arms. And I'm quoting here, which is a big statement, given that, these two words, Hezbollah and surrender arms, we haven't seen in the past. So I see some things moving in the positive direction, but at the same time, there's a lot to be done for this thing to change.
All right, I think you set a good level here. I think it's funny as you talk about how it's significantly weakened, but not entirely dead. It reminded me of the movie The Princess Bride. I don't know if you remember watching that, but it was this great Billy Crystal scene where he says, it turns out that he's only mostly dead. That sort of seems like what's going on here with Hezbollah. But okay, now let's talk about this government and the political will that it has, right? We have a new government. We've got a new president. We've got a new prime minister. And, a lot of people are looking at Joseph Aoun right now, the former head of the Lebanese armed forces, now the current president of the Lebanese government. He's the guy that is supposed to be leading this process. And I do agree with you that it is a positive sign that we're actually seeing things publicly stated by the leadership in Lebanon calling for the dismantlement of Hezbollah. Here's my question. What kind of forcing mechanism exists here other than the LAF going in at gunpoint to disarm this group? What else can be done short of forcing a conflict that I think most people in Lebanon are incredibly fearful of sparking?
Well, even if we ever get to a point where the LAF has to go after Hezbollah, even if Hezbollah is stronger than the LAF, it will not face it. The LAF has much more political capital and support, popular support. Even the Shia themselves wouldn't take the side of Hezbollah. Now, the question is, would the LAF ever do that? And for the LAF to do it, they will need political support behind them. And here's the catch. The Lebanese political system is designed in such a way that whenever you want to do anything, you have to make sure that at least almost everyone is on board. And Hezbollah knows how to play this game. And they've taken the Shia bloc hostage. So there are 27 Shia lawmakers in parliament, and all of them are controlled by Hezbollah and its ally, Speaker Nabih Berri. And as long as this is the case, they can obstruct. It's just like they can kill most of the decisions that the government or OWN or the prime minister might try to take. I think what we see is that the president is trying to tiptoe around the system, trying to dig from underneath Hezbollah. Whether this will be effective or not remains to be seen. But I'm happy to see that these people are saying and doing things that only in last October or September were not doable, or the things that never say. So we have some positive energy, but I wouldn't say that we can take our eyes off the ball yet.
No, for sure not. And I think that's the sort of the other side of this, right? That Hezbollah's soft power has, even if their hard power has diminished, it's the soft power. I mean, we saw it with the number of people that came out for Nasrallah's funeral a few weeks ago, right? I mean, there was like more than 500,000 people, could actually have been double that depending on who you talk to, right? It was a massive turnout. They still have a television station. They still have all of the vehicles for corruption. They still have entire neighborhoods that they control. They've got borders that are essentially, I mean, they're out of the hands of the sovereignty of the Lebanese state. The weapons pipeline, the cash, it's all still happening, right? So they may not have the hard power, but that soft power still gives you a sense that there is a stranglehold on the country. How do you start to even think about eroding that soft power?
Well, you're absolutely right, John. The soft power, the money, the amount of money at this point, Hezbollah is still wealthier than the state itself, and it can outbid the state at every corner. And unfortunately, this money is mainly cash, and it comes from Iran. So we will see what happens when President Trump's maximum pressure policy takes effect on the Iranians. There's also a pipeline that we're not always highlighting, but there's a cash pipeline that comes from Iraq. There are at least $3.3 billion that the Iraqi government pays to Hashd al-Shabi, the pro-Iran militias. And a big chunk of this money goes to Hezbollah. You mentioned the funeral of Nasrallah. Many aircrafts carrying supporters of Hezbollah from Iraq landed in Lebanon. And many Lebanese are saying that these planes were loaded with cash. And you can see it. I mean, if you know Hezbollah or people who support Hezbollah in Lebanon, they are getting money for reconstruction of their houses over the neighborhoods. So this problem is still there. It's totally different from the arms issue. I think we should be focused on this. I think our Treasury Department should tighten the screws as much as we can. And like we said, Iran is one part, but the Iraq source is a huge part of this that we should start thinking of.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned cash. I have to make note of this, that we also now see that Turkey's hand is involved in the support to Hezbollah. That was not on, I think, on anybody's bingo card, but we're now watching the Turks starting to dabble in Shia terror groups, right? It used to be that they only would dabble with the Sunnis. So this is interesting. And also, speaking of aircraft and Nasrallah's funeral, if you'll recall, the Israeli F-35s and F-16s buzzed the entire crowd, letting them know that they're still there. And in fact, some of those aircraft, as we understand it, were involved in the assassination of Nasrallah, which I think was quite a message as well. Some in Israel said that it wasn't strong enough of a message, that there were actually, perhaps bombing targets that were available at the funeral. I think it's probably best that the Israelis didn't go there. But okay, let's move to, there's border demarcation discussions that are going on right now. I understand the Israelis released 5 Lebanese prisoners apparently captured during the fighting in southern Lebanon over the last several months. This is all happening as the Israelis are trying to solidify a final border with Lebanon. That has been elusive for many years. You can recall Israel withdrawing in 2000. There was what was known as the Blue Line, which were literally blue barrels across that northern border of Israel and Lebanon's southern frontier. They're now trying to finally solidify this. What's happening there? Is this realistic that we'll actually get to a border where you don't have Hezbollah clashing with the Israelis over a meter here, a half kilometer there?
So the border issue is at times looks really easy. There are 13 points, disputed points, 7 of which can be resolved in a minute, so they're not as disputed. And the 6 others are not really that complicated. There's also the Sheba farms, and there might be a breakthrough now since Assad is out of the picture, and whoever is ruling Syria doesn't really like Hezbollah that much. So they might do the Lebanese a favor and just give the required document for Lebanon to concede the Sheba Farms area.
Right, because Sheba Farms was initially Syrian, correct?
Yes.
Or at least that's what the claim was. So Hezbollah said that it was fighting on behalf of Syria in order to liberate this space, even if the Syrians weren't.
Or they never declared it. They said until the Israelis pull out, after that we sort it out with the Syrians, and of course Assad played along. So now it seems that Shara will be happy to say, okay, this is Syrian, and this relieves Lebanon, and then the Lebanese can just focus on the 13 other points. So technically, the border, the demarcation issue is easy, but the myth that the Hezbollah propaganda has put out a myth in which they said, look, even if we demarcate the borders, Israel has demands. They'll never leave us alone. They will attack us. They will violate our airspace. And this can be stopped when the Israelis say, listen, we want peace. And peace is the counter narrative, right? I mean, you're saying, we're not talking about the border, we're talking about long term. You live on your side, we live on our side, we live in peace. And now this is the mind-boggling counter or rebuttal that came from the Lebanese side. The Lebanese government said that when Israel utters the word peace, this allows Hezbollah to criticize and attack us. So this hurts demarcation of the border. And you're thinking, this doesn't make sense because you're supposed to be focused on national Lebanese interest, not on what Hezbollah or how Hezbollah will criticize you or domestic politics. So this is where we are. I think demarcation is moving along with or without a peace treaty. But the sticking point here is that Hezbollah signed on a ceasefire, that for Israel to withdraw, they have to give up their arms first. Now, Hezbollah, what I saw this morning from their speeches, their Friday prayer speeches, now they're saying, we will give up our arms only after Israel withdraws. So now they're reversing what they have signed on during the ceasefire. This doesn't mean that the government agrees to what they're saying, but this tells us that they have something in mind. They're probably moving in a different direction. It remains to be seen how the Lebanese government and, of course, the Lebanese president will counter this new Hezbollah way of just trying to wiggle themselves out of the commitment that they had signed on.
All right, last question for you before I let you go. You've been talking about the possibility of peace. You just mentioned it, the idea that there could be. Let's actually not even call it normalization, right? Because there's been nothing normal between Israel and Lebanon, right? But the idea that they would lay down their arms, both sides, there wouldn't be a Hezbollah anymore. Israel and Lebanon agree to live in peace. They don't actually have any reason to fight because there's really no significant disagreement other than, I think, generally the Lebanese government's refusal in the past to recognize the state of Israel and Hezbollah's commitment to keep fighting the Israelis with Iranian support. You are making the argument that there is a world in which peace can be established. Now, there are a lot of people out there that are saying, man, I'm gonna have whatever that guy's having because he's really not sober, right? By the way, nothing wrong with that. Drink whatever you want. But the question really is this a feasible thing right now, given that show of force that we saw, the hundreds of thousands of people coming out and supporting Nasrallah or supporting Hezbollah during Nasrallah's funeral? You get this. I mean, for me, I feel the friction, right? On the one hand, I understand that there should be no reason for these two countries to be at war. But the reason is Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is not gone. And it doesn't look like it's going to be gone anytime soon. So how do we understand the state of play here?
Well, in every country, you have a majority and a minority. You'll never have all of the Lebanese supporting peace, just like you will never have all of the Americans supporting anything. The point is, since Hezbollah has the arms and it can, they practice violence, they haven't allowed the peace supporters to campaign in Lebanon. So the point here, if you allow peace supporters to speak up and get out and the elections are coming, May 2026, Lebanon will hold parliamentary election. If you can make this an issue on which people can run on for parliament, then the whole scene will change. As someone very much connected to Lebanon, I know that there are so many voices that are just scared, if they ever feel that they're secure, that they're physically secure in Lebanon, they would say, we want peace, that we think that peace is in the interest of Lebanon. And the model here is that, as we all know, is the Abraham Accords, because the UAE and Bahrain came out and said, listen, we love the Palestinians and everything, but we are putting our national interests first. And they call it a sovereign decision to sign peace with Israel. So Lebanon is debating the same debate. Many Lebanese, they're saying, let's do like Dubai. And if you know any Lebanese, they think that they're in competition with Dubai, which they're not. But that's the thinking, that Beirut was like Dubai, that Beirut can come back and become like Dubai. So this is the model. So you have a big faction that supports this. If this big faction, say 20%, not as big, if this faction gets a say in politics and can run on peace, then maybe we can present to 30, 40%. You never know. And this is how it starts rolling. And that's where I stand, and where other Lebanese are thinking, okay, let's start talking about peace, because the more we say the word peace, the more the word peace becomes normal. So it will not happen overnight, but I'm like always, I'm always cautiously optimistic.
You are. I am always cautiously, or maybe even not even cautiously pessimistic. That's unfortunately the way that you often are not proven wrong in the Middle East. But I appreciate your optimism. I appreciate your vision. And I do appreciate you for joining us this morning on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you, John.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. John Hardy, Deputy Director of FDD's Russia program, is out with a policy brief on FDD's website, asserting that Trump should threaten Moscow with economic sanctions and increased military aid to Ukraine if Putin fails to adhere to the ceasefire that may be on the horizon. John underscores that without concrete consequences, war-minded Putin has no reason to work with anyone. FDD founder and president Cliff May's column in the Washington Times addresses the so-called clean energy revolution, which has yet to actually materialize. Cliff cites our colleague Brenda Schaefer, who warns that current clean energy policies not only worsen global energy poverty, but also enable China to go full steam ahead, pun intended, on cornering the energy market, jeopardizing U.S. national security and energy independence. Finally, catch yours truly and former FDD Morning Brief guest Wendy Sachs and her documentary October 8. That's hitting theaters today. The film examines the stark rise in campus anti-Semitism in the aftermath of the October 7th Hamas massacre. That film is showing at theaters across the country today. Buy your tickets, support Wendy's work, and if you haven't seen the movie, it is terrific. That's it for now, folks. If you're craving more, check out the expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Read our quick takes on X at FDD, or take a peek at our Instagram and YouTube channels with great videos and content. Please contribute to our mission with a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. We are most grateful to our donors for helping make this work possible. We cannot do it without you. Tune in Monday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. featuring my buddy Grant Rumley. He directs the Washington Institute for Near East Policy's program on great power competition and the Middle East. Grant used to work with us here at FDD, and he's one of the smartest and most down-to-earth people I've met. That is a rare combination here in Washington. So tune in for that. Until then, have a restful weekend. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.